All right, good morning. Welcome again. Just want to make sure everyone is able to hear us. We've worked out our technical issues and we're ready to go ahead and get the November webinar started. Okay, we're good to go. So what we're going to do is go ahead and get started with our information for November. Christy Weaver-Harris will be providing some Chapter 30 updates in this portion of today's presentation.
All right, good morning, everybody. I'm going to give you an overview of the proposed Chapter 30 special education regulations. Those came out on Friday. So on Friday, November 8th, 2019, OSSI posted the proposed Chapter 30 regulations. So these are the regulations that govern special education. Your foundational requirements for special education come from IDEA. The DC's local requirements primarily come from these regulations and our existing policies. Let me be clear that these regulations will supersede existing regulation and policy. So it's worth your time to review and provide comment on these. This is going to govern all special education in the district, all of your processes, and even the things that you currently follow that are in policy. This will supersede that. So the proposed regulations are open for comment through Tuesday, January 7th. And my apologies if this spans the holidays. We've pushed for an extended comment period to accommodate that. In addition to written comment, we're hosting 3 public hearings. The first one is this Thursday. There's another one on Monday, December 2nd, and then final public hearing is on Thursday, December 12th. The Thursday, December 12th hearing is being held in conjunction with the staff or our state advisory panel for special education. It's intended for students and parents to provide input, but is open to the public. It's going to follow a slightly different format than you normally see at our public hearings. We're looking for your input on these regulations. This is really your opportunity to help shape special education requirements and LEA obligations in the district. Some quick background on these regulations. If you've been around in DC for a while, you've been hearing about them for quite some time. The most recent overhaul of special education requirements in the district predates the most recent version of IDEA. So we've done some interim piecemeal updates to the regulations in the last decade, and we've been working on these proposed regulations for the entirety of my 7.5 years at OSSI. You may remember in 2017 that we released an advance notice of proposed rulemaking, or an ANPR. This draft incorporates the comments that we received at that time, as well as comments that we received during last summer's short interim update to Chapter 30. The interim update to Chapter 30 that was released in July 2018 primarily covered issues related to the DL lawsuit, child fine, and the initial evaluation timeline. So the proposed regulations are not intended to effectuate a huge shift in practice for LEAs. We are really looking to clarify existing requirements and language and to remove outdated or confusing references. We're hoping to accomplish some boring administrative goals, like moving the regulations into our current title in the DCMR, and the chapter has also been reordered to more closely align with IDEA and the special education process. So we're hoping that it makes more logical sense when you're reading it. Programmatically, we're looking to update the regulations to more accurately reflect current practices in the district and help incorporate some existing best practices that we know are in place widespread across LEAs. So like I said, the proposed regulations do not effectuate a huge shift in practice, but the language is definitely different. So we need your public comment to know if we're clearly communicating what your responsibilities are here. The regulations incorporate long-standing policy requirements and recent changes in laws such as the Catania legislation, so specifically the initial evaluation timeline, which has already been changed, and the age of secondary transition planning, which has already been changed. That's been changed in the DC code, like in our foundational law, but we are incorporating those requirements also in Chapter 30 regulations. So when I say the regulations incorporate existing policy, I mean those policy requirements are included as part of the proposed regulations, which means that they are also open for public comment. A lot of people have asked me what is different about these regulations, and that's a very good question. But I also want to emphasize that you can and should comment on the entirety of the regulations, both new or older existing requirements. Especially the requirements that you think that are currently in place that you may think are problematic. The proposal of Chapter 30 reopens all of the requirements for special education. So this is your opportunity to provide input on the things that you think are good and bad. And there are some new requirements that are intended to clarify your obligations and also to improve outcomes for students with disabilities across the district. So I'm going to give you a quick overview of what's in the proposed regulations to help you get oriented to what's actually in the document. Some sections are entirely new as compared to the old regulations and current policy, but most of these sections are just reflective of IDEA requirements that we had not yet addressed in our current law. For example, homebound services and hospital instruction, when it is not required for FAPE, is included in these regulations. And this was recently a topic that was before the DC Council, so I definitely encourage you to review and provide feedback on our approach to the topic. We also address home instruction that is required for FAPE, so this is when excuse me. This is when the IEP team determines that instruction in the home is the child's least restrictive environment. One of the biggest sections of change here is the IEP certificate of completion section, which establishes a requirement that LEAs have a policy and minimum requirements for awarding a certificate. So if an LEA does not establish its own policy, those regulations would establish All right, thank you for your patience. So, if an LEA does not establish its own policy, these regulations would establish minimum requirements for a certificate. We're definitely seeking your comment on whether those minimum requirements make sense for your students. There's also a new section on exit from special education, which includes addressing like age out and when a student exits due to graduation. And a new section establishing minimum qualifications for paraprofessionals, so dedicated aides, including instructional aides, health aides, and behavioral aides. So there's a section on private placement of students by parents when FAPE is not at issue, and this follows IDEA requirements, but it governs your parentally placed private school students. We also have a section incorporating DC code requirements related to parent observations, and a big area of change here is that we've also pulled in current non-public requirements for seclusion and restraint, and are proposing that they apply to all LEAs for all students with disabilities at LEAs. So that's a big change for LEAs, and I encourage you to review that section. It also includes documentation requirements for incidences of seclusion and restraint. And if you're familiar with the non-public regulations, the requirements are the same. It's just bound over for LEAs, but that is a big shift in your practice, so it's worth taking a look at. There are also quite a few sections that incorporate existing requirements that are currently found in policy, and these are good sections to highlight what I said earlier about providing feedback on existing policies that you would like to see change in. For example, I know the transfer student policy has some hot points in it. Not everybody loves it. We also address the non-public placement process in these regulations, as well as state complaints under IDEA. And you can see here where those connections are made between the section and the policy. As I said earlier, there are a lot of changes in wording, but not a lot of changes in meaning. So this is true throughout the regulations, but we want to highlight some areas to help you focus on the biggest areas of change. Section 3001 governs general LEA responsibilities to provide FAPE. It has a lot of wording changes, but not a lot of meaning changes. Here we want to make sure that we're clear about your responsibilities. So please review that section, give us comment on whether it's clear to you what your obligations are. The section on disability categories, I personally think, is actually the biggest area of change. It's important to remember that this eligibility criteria would replace the current policy criteria. I definitely encourage you to closely review this section. Ideally, getting in front of the folks at your LEAs that are responsible for eligibility determinations, like your school psychologist. There's some pretty big changes in that section because we're taking the IDEA requirements for disability categories and applying them locally, which we already were doing, but we have some additional clarifying qualifications for each disability category that are stripped out. So there's a lot more detail in our policy than there is in this section for disability categories. So I think it's a pretty significant area of change, and I definitely encourage you to review it. There's a section in here on adapted PE that incorporates existing IDEA requirements, and the secondary transition section incorporates into regulation, like I said, the requirement to start transition planning at age 14. That's already in effect because it's in the DC code, and you are all already doing this. So there's a section in here that establishes the state-level IEP system as the authoritative system of record. This is currently the STED system. We have a section on educational surrogate parents, and again, the sections on seclusion and restraint, I think, are huge areas for you to review. There's also a lot of changes in the definition section. Most things we've tied back to the IDEA language, but those are changes from our current language. We tend, in our current language, to have a lot more explanatory information, and we are tying everything back now to this strict language that's in IDEA. So we want to make sure that you're clear on what your obligations are and what these things mean to you. And we want to make sure that our definitions and the approaches that we're taking here are appropriate for our specific context, because DC does have a very unique educational landscape. We want to make sure that we are adapting these requirements to make sure that they fit our purposes. So it's a lot to get through. The proposed regulations are 120 pages. We're releasing some resources to help you and other stakeholders access the regulations and orient yourselves so that you can organize your public comments. So on our website today, we're going to publish a memorandum that basically gives you all of the information I've provided today, puts it all in writing. We're also going to record a separate webinar going over this content, very similar to what the content is that I've gone over today. These slides were adapted from that webinar. We're going to be recording that and publishing that on our website as soon as possible, as soon as I can get through recording something for half an hour and not spending half the time coughing at you. We developed some guided questions to help point folks in the areas of greatest change that we're most interested in receiving comment on. So the federal government takes this approach when they release regulations. It's kind of like here's some suggested questions that you could address in your public comment. But I really do want to emphasize that we want your feedback on the entirety of the regulations, both new and old requirements. So that's just to kind of help you focus your feedback. If you have additional feedback, we really do want to hear it. And I definitely encourage you to read as much of the whole thing as you possibly can. We're also going to post a subsection by subsection crosswalk that gives you citations or references to the current Chapter 30 requirements, IDEA, and local policy. A lot of people have asked me about providing a red line. Honestly, we tried multiple times to redline this document. It is unreadable and absolutely useless for your purposes. There's a lot of wording changes, so it's a lot of red text, but it's not a lot of meaning changes, especially when those wording changes are changing our current wording to IDEA requirements, right? Like if it's an IDEA requirement, we only have so much latitude with changing what the requirement is. So it would be an entirely red document that doesn't actually show you what is impactfully different for you in these regulations. So I'm sorry that we're not able to provide that to you, but I hope that these other resources will be helpful in you accessing and understanding the regulations and in you developing your public comment on them. So as I said earlier, we are seeking comment from all stakeholders in these regulations. Your voice is you as LEAs. Your voice is perhaps the most important here because I think it's LEAs that will feel the biggest impact. These regulations really address what LEA obligations are, and it addresses what your obligations are for students, right? So the public comment period is open through Tuesday, January 7th, and you can submit comment via email to ossi.publiccomment@dc.gov or via hand or mail delivery to me at 1050 First Street Northeast, 5th floor. If you can't remember ossi.publiccomment@dc.gov, you can email me directly at christy.weaver-harris@dc.gov. Anything that you submit to us will be included as part of the record. So again, I said earlier that we're holding three public hearings on this. The first is this Thursday evening from 5 to 7. The second is Monday, December 2nd from 5 to 7, and we have 2 persons currently signed up to testify at that hearing. And the final hearing is Thursday, December 12th from 6 to 8. Again, that's in conjunction with the staff, and is intended for parents and students, but is open to the public. So I hope that these times are fairly convenient for you. I know that there is no convenient time for public comment or public hearing. In the past, we've had one hearing that was held during like the business or school day, like during school hours, but it wasn't usually well attended. If that's something that you think we should return to, if it's easier for you if we schedule these kinds of things during the day, please let me know directly, and we can plan that for future proposals. After Chapter 30 is done, we have to overhaul all of the policies that are to be consistent with Chapter 30, right? So you're going to be seeing proposals from us on a fairly consistent basis for the next 18 to 24 months. So we want to make sure that we're taking that approach, we're approaching those proposals in a way that best allows you to provide us feedback on the things that we're proposing, right? So if you have any questions about the proposed regulations or about the public comment period or any of that, please contact me directly at christy.weaver-harris@dc.gov, and I will do my best to get back to you. I unfortunately cannot answer specific questions about what the regulations say or mean or intend, but I can do my best to be responsive to your questions.
Thank you, Christy. We will be wrapping up now with the announcement and reminders section. We just have a few quick reminders in this section for folks today, and that is SEDS updates. So we are currently releasing these feature releases in SEDS, which you should see, and these are just small improvements to help your user experience in SEDS. So what we have now is the user search results, and that's the last login column. And what that does is it gives the ability for users with access to the user view screen to see the last time a user logged into the system. How is that relevant for you folks on the phone? If you want to find out the last time one of the providers or coordinators from one of your non-public schools is logged in, you can actually see that information as long as you have the data administrator access level. You're able to see the last login. So that'll be under that user screen, the very last column. Now, please note, if the user has not logged into the system, and this could be the case with some of our users, if they have not logged in the system, in that section next to their name for the last login, that would actually be blank on that screen if the user has never logged in. And the next update that we want to preview to you is the print export caseload from aggregate. So users requested a way to export their caseload from multiple sites. So this is really relevant for our related service providers, folks that service multiple LEAs, like in your non-public environment. Folks that have caseloads at different LEAs, they now have the ability to print or export their caseload from the aggregate level. And from the aggregate page for the caseload, they can create a PDF or an Excel export of their caseload information, and that will include all associated LEAs. So if you have students, if you're a non-public and you're a provider or a coordinator at a non-public, and you service DCPS, E.L. Haynes, and 2 other LEAs, you'll be able to run that report from the aggregate level. Again, you can export this and you can also print it, PDF or as a text file. Okay, and just to show you what that looks like for our aggregate users, if you're at the aggregate level, there'll be a link at the top of your page for caseloads, and this will allow you to access the caseload, show you the number of systems that user is affiliated with, and then we can actually print and export the caseload from that associated user. So remember, this is only available at the aggregate level for aggregate users. For local users that are just logging into your LEA Sys4 SEDS, they are still able to print out their caseload information as they normally would. This really takes care of our aggregate users that serve multiple LEAs. Okay, so that concludes our announcements and reminders. We just want to also point you back to some of our training and resources available on the OSSI website. There's the Getting Started with SEDS Related Service Provision 101, Navigating Initial Eligibility in SEDS, and the SEDS Basic User Guide. That is also available on the OSSI website. As always, the archive of our monthly special ed POC recordings are available for you to access on the OSSI website. They're all cataloged for previous months. And the recording for today will be available within 48 hours at the center. With some additional information, you need to reach out to folks. There's some contact information for OSSI. Just as a reminder, December, this information right here will correct this, but December, we will not be hosting a monthly special ed POC webinar. We will be sending out an email with any kind of announcements and reminders of things that we need to make you aware of for the month of December. Because that is a short month and a lot of folks will be on winter break during that time, we'll be sending out an announcement. So just a reminder, no broadcast for the month of November. December. These holidays are already running together. Okay, so that's our information for today. Thank you so much for your time and for attending. Remember, you are moments away from the best part of your day. Have a great afternoon.